Unlike Debbie from last week, I am not a lifelong member of Wall Street. I grew up on a farm in southeast Missouri, attending a small Baptist church of which my grandparents were charter members. My Baptist affiliation continued through college and during my young adult years. In the early 70s, my family and I moved to Louisville, then subsequently to southern Indiana. During that time, we were members of some very caring and loving Baptist congregations in this area, making long, lifetime, dear friends from each of those churches. However, over time, with a change in leadership in the Baptist hierarchy and changing theological ideals in the Baptist denomination, it became apparent that we needed to make a change. In the early 1990s, we began our search for a church that matched our theology and one that was open and accepting of all people in the area of church leadership. When we visited Wall Street, we were warmly welcomed and eventually agreed that this church was one that we could call home. We joined the church in 1994, joining the Seekers Sunday School class shortly afterwards. Our 19-year-old daughter, Jill, was a freshman at Bellarmine University at the time. Jill had been born with a rare, historically terminal liver disease in 1975 and was on the list for a liver transplant. It was here on November 6, 1994, sitting right there on the fourth row, that she received the call telling her that a donated liver was available for her. We left church that day driving to Jewish Hospital to begin our long wait for Jill's second chance of life. As a family and dear friends gathered from north, south, east, and west to be with us, we settled in our designated waiting room. We hadn't been there long when Joe and Patty Easley arrived, bringing us a simple sheet of paper with names and times indicating when our Wall Street family would be praying for Jill and us, her family, every hour for the next 24 hours. There are people here today who have told me that they remember praying that night. I cannot begin to adequately express the love and support that simple document made us feel. Jill has that tattered piece of paper in her first transplant scrapbook today. After napping on chairs and on the floor throughout the night, we were surprisingly greeted by members of our Sunday school class, bringing us McDonald's sausage biscuits and apple turnovers on Monday morning. Friends, that is what church is about: praying and caring for one another. We knew then that Wall Street was the place for us. Over the years since, I have appreciated the many, many ways that Wall Street has ministered to our communities here and afar. In addition to all the mission and outreach opportunities, one of the things that endeared me personally to Wall Street was the music. Music has always been important to me, and long before my schedule allowed me to be part of the chancel choir, the chancel choir was part of my worship experience. Music feeds my soul, and I'm so thankful that Wall Street sees fit to hire talented and dedicated musicians such as Becky and Eric to lead us in worship. Your financial gifts make that happen. Also, since its inception, I've been privileged to be part of Wall Street's youth music camp. It makes my heart happy to see young people from right here in our neighborhood and across our community enjoy the camp experience. Seeing kids hear about Jesus for the first time, seeing kids from different backgrounds singing, playing, and learning together makes all the work, time, and preparation worthwhile. Thank you again for making that happen through your financial gifts. Before I close, I want to mention an opportunity that I've taken advantage of over the past 4.5 years. If you are over 72, and a few of us are, 72 and a half years of age, and you have an IRA, you're aware that you had to start making yearly required minimum distributions or yearly withdrawals. One thing you may not know is that you can withdraw that portion as a qualified charitable distribution, tax-free, designating it as a tithe and/or a gift to Wall Street. If you have questions, you can feel free to ask me or, of course, your financial advisor. In closing, I'm reminded daily that my life and my resources are a gift from God, a gift that I have the privilege to share. I'm thankful that Wall Street United Methodist Church uses my gifts wisely to minister to our community and communities all around the world. Thank you, Wall Street, for being God's hands, feet, and voice for 217 years.
Our reading today is from the 10th chapter of Mark, verses 35 through 45. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Appoint us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to appoint, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Instead, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Thank you so much, Carol. So, friends, we are continuing with our Impossible, Possible, Promise of Enough Stewardship sermon series. It's a series of encounters in which Jesus challenges people to believe and act as if the impossible is possible. And believe it or not, these are actually, these come from the lectionary readings. We're just about a week ahead of the lectionary. But all of these stories follow back to back. So the story we heard last week is recorded just before this story. Now, the promise of God that we will have enough to meet our needs, that we'll have enough to do the ministry, the mission, the work that God has called us to, that can sometimes feel impossible. But what we're asking is, what would it look like for us as a congregation and as individuals if we started living our discipleship in ways that claim that promise, that there is enough, that there will be enough for us to be who we are called to be and to do what we are called to do, right? And so to help us with living into the possibility of God's promises, we're grappling over these 4 weeks with some of the ideas that inform our practice of stewardship, right? And remember that stewardship is the way we care for and the way we responsibly use the resources that are entrusted to us. And it's resources like time and talents and abilities and knowledge and wisdom and our stuff, right? And our money. And so last week we talked about the possibilities in that seemingly impossible promise of generosity, right? We engaged with that encounter where a rich man comes to Jesus and says, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says you need to follow, the way of God. You need to follow the law. You need to do good. And the guy says, I've done that. I really have. All my life I've done that. And Jesus says, then the only thing you need to do still is sell everything you have, give to the poor, and come and follow me, right? That's a story very clearly about money, right? And about one person's relationship with money. So it makes absolute sense that we would include it in a stewardship sermon series. And this story feels a little bit different. It doesn't seem to be quite as obviously about money, but what does it have to do with stewardship? I would say that the seemingly impossible promise of humility is a part of our stewardship practices that we need to grapple with. And I think we need to grapple with that concept of humility in part because we tend to take a somewhat less than humble stance when we engage with this story, right? When we read James and John requesting or demanding from Jesus that they get to share in his glory, oftentimes our response is, those silly disciples. Once again, those guys just don't get it. Man, they don't understand what Jesus is really about. They messed up again. Boy, I'm so glad that we don't think about discipleship that way. Whew! I wonder if we do think like that. I think we do as individuals often. Do you remember, and I was shocked to realize that this was like 25 years ago, but do you all remember the Prayer of Jabez book? All right? I was working for Cokesbury when that book came out, and then all the subsequent workbooks and tchotchkes and things like that went with it. It was this idea that it very much fit into the prosperity gospel, which is this beautifully, uniquely American way of looking at the gospel, and it's this idea that, boy, if we just tap into Jesus, if we just follow Jesus, we are going to get materially rewarded in ways we couldn't possibly imagine, right? And so there were preachers on TV that were talking about this guy, all he did was pray a little bit, and the next thing that you know, somebody gave him a house. And this woman, she prayed just a little bit, and the next thing you know, she had a brand new car in her driveway. Right? At the very least, we often think that we should have it a bit better, right? Gosh, I follow Jesus. I should have it just a little bit better than those people who don't. So we may not explicitly ask Jesus or demand things from Jesus, but I do think that oftentimes, whether we like to admit it or not, we do expect things from Jesus. We expect that Jesus will reward us, and we really expect him to reward us materially. And I wonder if we as a congregation sometimes fall into that same way of thinking that led James and John to ask Jesus for those spots of glory. Jesus, if we could just build a gym, we could do things for your kingdom. Oh, Jesus, if we just had a fancier program, if we had more people, if we could do more stuff, boy, Jesus, the things we could do for you. If we had a coffee bar in the narthex. Think of what we could do for the church. And if we don't fall into that temptation, that idea of boy, if we're a good church, we should be having lots of cool stuff, we do, I think, absolutely fall into that temptation that the other disciples fell into. You guys, how could you ask Jesus for all that stuff? We should get some of that stuff too. And we look at the church down the street, Jesus, come on, man, why did they get all the cool stuff? Jesus, we're doing good things too, why aren't you? Right? I wonder if the promise of humility often seems impossible because we have such a difficult time seeing that we need it or seeing that we lack it. And I wonder, too, if one of the challenges of humility is that we so often twist it up with shame. And shame is different than humility, right? Humility is not about putting ourselves or someone else in their place. You think you're so great? Get over yourself. That's not what it's about. That's kingdom of this world thinking. And kingdom of this world thinking is precisely what Jesus comes to ransom us from. And he does throughout his ministry what he does here, which is to teach that there is another way of being in community, that his kingdom looks different than the kingdom of this world. And then Jesus models how to live into that different way, into that different kind of kingdom. At the end of the day, if we strip it all down, James and John, and honestly the other disciples too, are approaching discipleship in this story as transactional. If we follow Jesus, we expect to get something. Remember that just a few verses before, what we heard last week, we heard Peter say, Jesus, we're the ones who gave up everything to follow you. Right? So if we're the ones who gave up everything to follow you, what are we getting for that? What do we get back for that? And friends, it hurts to say and it hurts to hear, but we so often see our discipleship as transactional. It's not just what we get out of it as individuals, but it's what we look at what we get out of it as an organization, right? And so we look at our stewardship this way. What will we get if we do this ministry? Will we get more people to come and join us? Specifically, more people who can give more money to us. Again, it's all for the church. It's all for good. It's so we can do more good. But it's still transactional. We're evaluating what we give by what we get back. And so we give expecting to get something back. But Jesus' possible promise of humility invites us to see discipleship not as transactional, but as relational, as a sharing in Jesus' life, as a sharing in Jesus' self-giving. That's the baptism and the cup that we share. As an invitation to share that way of relational life with others, that's the serving. So I wonder what it would look like if we started evaluating how we make and spend money by its ability to create space and opportunities to build relationships. How does the way we give or spend as a church establish or strengthen or nourish or honor relationships? And as we said a couple of weeks ago, and we repeated again last week, we're talking about relationships with God, relationships with creation, relationships with our communities, relationship with our neighbors, with each other in this congregation, with ourselves. What would it look like if we evaluated our stewardship on its ability to nourish relationship? Because Jesus' response to James and John does not seek to shame or embarrass them. He's not trying to put them in their place. He's not trying to punish them for their distinctly unhumble request. We sometimes read it that way, right? We read it as Jesus saying, "Oh, you think you can follow me? Woo-hoo! You think you can go through what I'm going to go through? Oh man, just wait, you're going to." But that's not what Jesus is doing. Instead, Jesus' response invites James and John into a deeper relationship. And that depth has to do with empathy. So here is my question for you. In his life and his ministry and his death and his resurrection, who does Jesus side with? Jesus sides with the suffering. Jesus sides with people who are on the margins. Jesus sides with people who lack power. Jesus sides with people who have power imposed upon them by others in ways that are not only not life-giving, but are life-destroying. Jesus sides with those who suffer. That's what being baptized with his baptism and drinking from the same cup means. It means we are to side with, we are to empathize with those who ache, with those who need. But James and John, here's the heartbreaking part. James and John don't even empathize with Jesus, with their friend. I said that this was a lectionary reading, but if you went back and saw what the lectionary reading was for last week, and you look at this one, you'll notice that there are like 3 or 4 verses that are missing. So what has happened just before James and John come and talk to Jesus is that Jesus has, for the 3rd time, said to his friends, the road we are on leads to Jerusalem, where I will suffer, where I will be tortured, where I will die a horrible, agonizing death. That's the road we're on. And I wonder, how did Jesus feel on that road? And was his sharing of that not only about a testimony to the theology that we've built around him, but was it also him sharing with his friends, this is the thing that I'm about to have to suffer? And James and John breeze right over that. Think about how you have felt in those times when you have come to somebody you love or somebody you hoped to find connection with and said, here's this thing that's on my heart and it's serious. And it could be a heartache, it could be a joy, but here's this deep, profound thing for me. And to have that person be like, that's cool. Hey, what do you want to get for lunch? Right? It doesn't feel good. And that's essentially what James and John have just done. They don't even empathize with Jesus. But Jesus brings them, and then he brings all the disciples back to a place where they are invited to empathize, where they're invited to understand the reality of suffering, and where they are called to relinquish control. Because in so many ways that we are supremely uncomfortable with, the impossible possible promise of humility is about relinquishing power and control so that others might have what they need for the flourishing of life. Jesus is on the way to the ultimate surrendering of control. The intention of crucifixion is not only to end life. The intention of crucifixion is to annihilate the self. And Jesus steps into that with people who have experienced that kind of suffering. Jesus surrenders all control to be with people who don't get the choice to surrender that kind of control. And then Jesus says, James, John, all you disciples, that's the impossible path of humility that I'm calling you to. Discipleship is about giving oneself up entirely with Jesus for the life of the world. And that's the impossible promise of humility that we're called to. And it is impossible on our own. And so if we're being honest with ourselves, we often let ourselves off the hook with that. Because we are not on the road to the cross. And we are not being called to give up our lives. We aren't. And so we kind of let go of the impossibility of that call. So what might a relational discipleship of humility, one that's rooted in empathy, look like for us? This is all going to sound simple, but think about how hard it really is. For us in here, in this congregation, worshiping online, that kind of relational, empathetic discipleship might look like you have to give up the thing you want so that he can have life, a flourishing of life. It means that you might have to give up the thing that you prefer, right? Or the thing that you like, or the thing that matters deeply to you, so that they can have access to a deeper relationship, whether that's with you or with God or with each other. It means us giving up what we want so that everyone can flourish. And that's hard for us to do, right? Especially with our money, because we like to be able to say, well, I want to give to this specific thing so that it can take care of that thing that matters to me, even if that's not the thing that is needed right now. And outside the congregation, this kind of relational, empathetic discipleship might mean recognizing that people we are helping also have gifts. And by that, I mean that they have things to give. And so that relinquishing control might mean that we say, we are not in charge of what this looks like. We are in relationship with you, and you know what you need, what this community needs for life and flourishing. An example that I have, and I thought about it again, I don't know if you all have seen notes about this, but the conferences in North Carolina have said, please stop sending like material things. Our warehouses are full of cleaning supplies and construction supplies and things like that. So we don't need those things anymore, right? But we do have a tendency to be like, no, we're still collecting flood buckets, right? Or we're going to send you shoes or whatever. I had a friend, I'm going to call him Ted. That's not his real name. Remember the earthquake in Haiti several years ago? Ted had been to Haiti several times with a mission trip. At that point, that organization said, in recovering from the earthquake, we need only medical people to come, people who are doctors, nurses, dentists, techs, therapists, right? We need only medical people to come. And my friend Ted, who was like not a medical person at all, was like, I'm going to go anyway. And he did. But what did that do? That took away resources that were needed to care for somebody who wasn't there to do what needed to be done, but was there to do what made him feel good. Our relationship with stewardship, our stewardship practices themselves can happen at arm's length, right? They can be transactional. So I give you this, and then I get that. Whether it could just be that I get that awesome feeling that I am there. It can be transactional with Jesus. Jesus, I will do these 5 things for you. So if you then would answer those prayers, right? But instead, we can have our stewardship be relational. We can have it be deeply empathetic. We can have it grounded in true humility, so that instead of being at arm's length, we come next to, arm in arm, with the people that we're serving, so that we relinquish control over what that service might look like. It's not what I want to do, it's what needs to be done. We can have our stewardship be something that is about profound mutual relationship. I wonder how much more our lives would flourish as a congregation and as a community if we live into the impossible promise of humility